How's it going, everybody? This is Kevin Kerrang with College Golf Local, and I'm thrilled to bring on Jim Grady and Pat Grady, both coaches, assistant coaches, teammates of mine at University of Colorado, legends in the Colorado golf landscape. So, fellas, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to talk a little bit about kind of your golfing career, what you saw as a junior golfer, a college golfer. You've both been assistant coaches. You guys have an amazing perspective that I think is really unique and can be really insightful even for the kids here in Southwest Missouri. So I want to start off, Jim, and just kind of ask you to kind of take us through a little bit of your, kind of briefly through your high school career and what it was like being recruited, schools you were maybe looking at, and how ultimately you ended up at University of Colorado.
Okay. Yeah, so I graduated high school in 2003 from a high school in suburban Denver, kind of near Boulder. And high school career was actually, when I started out, it was not intended to be some sort of, I'm going to for sure play college golf or anything. I just started playing golf in 8th grade on a regular basis. And I was really small when I entered high school. And at that point, I'd played middle school football. And I was like, there's no way I can play high school football. I'm so small at this point. I was like, well, maybe I should try out for golf. And I actually shot 98 on a very easy golf course and was the 10th out of 10th player to make the high school team my freshman year. And so I just barely made it. So I really started liking golf at that point. And over the course of the next 1 or 2 years, I got my scores down into the 70s on a regular basis on not the hardest golf courses, but, medium difficulty courses around the Denver area, and started thinking kind of halfway through high school, maybe I can play college golf. And so that's when I just started to reach out to kind of, better, say, Division II schools, maybe lower end Division I schools, and then occasionally throw in a few dream schools in there and try and reach out. But mostly it revolved around junior golf tournaments in Colorado. I can't even remember, honestly, at this point what all I played in. But
as you were reaching out to as you reached out to those schools, the Division II schools and some of the other ones, like, how did you even know what to do? Like, what guideline were you following a guideline or anything like that?
I think back, there was that Ping sort of college golf book. I don't know if they still make it, but it had the listing of all the coaches' names at most schools around the country. So you could contact them that way via email. But honestly, I think I did quite a few via direct mailings at that point, because this would have been between 2001 and 2003 before I graduated. So it was just not much different than applying to a job, just kind of keeping people updated and sending your resume, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good way to put it. I mean, you don't just get a job by being lazy and assuming somebody's going to recruit you. You've kind of got to be proactive and get your name out there. So how did you ultimately end up at Colorado then?
Yeah, so Pat and I were pretty lucky. We grew up like 10, 12 miles away from Boulder, and the assistant coach at the time was a local teaching pro in our community. And so just by having our results basically privy to him, basically in his face, because we were playing at courses that he taught at or was frequently a visitor to. And so he just took a notice to us, and that's eventually how I got on the team, as well as some decent scores, of course. But I think you just have to put yourself out there via emails, via letters, via just chatting people up anytime you get a chance to see them at a golf course.
Yeah, that's great advice. Pat, I wanna throw it to you now and just kind of ask, I mean, Jim's your older brother, so how much of what you did was kind of because you saw what he did and you kind of followed the same path? Was there anything that maybe you got some advice and did some things differently throughout the recruiting process? How did that work for you?
I was fortunate I didn't have to think about anything because I just copied and pasted what Jim did. And I hate to say it, one of the reasons I got on the team was because of him and his, good attitude and work ethic and things like that. Because, when I was coming out of high school, I bet I was I think 75 average my senior year, and I was supposed to go to a Division II school, but then had a really good summer after senior year. And even with that, I don't know if I would have got on the team without my brother there already. So yeah, copy and paste.
And Kevin, let's point out that he did win some pretty big tournaments during his amateur career.
After high school, though, yeah.
So was that the summer between your senior year and when you would have been a freshman is when you kind of like started blossoming, you would say?
I had to make a really hard phone call. 6 weeks before school started, I was signed up to play for a Division II school, to tell that coach I was not going to attend, and I would be attending the University of Colorado 6 weeks before school. Imagine the heartbreak
Yeah.
for for a
Well,
player.
especially like with you playing as well as you were, I imagine that was really rough.
Right. At that time, I had a really great summer and just late bloomer. And so that's kind of what I always told kids when I was a coach. It was hard to be a Division I coach, and I had to tell 200 kids no for every one kid I said yes to. But I would always give them that story, and it's like, it's never too late if you work hard. And some of them would respond, and then a lot of them wouldn't. But that's my advice to your kids in Southwest Missouri, Kevin, is so when a coach tells you no, he also told 199 kids no, the same thing. But are you going to, just lay over and die, or are you going to put the extra work in and pay attention to the advice that he gave you when he said no?
Right. Was there a defining moment for you leading up to that time where maybe there was like a heartbreak that really like kicked you into gear, to get you working as hard as you did to improve? And obviously we can talk a little bit later about the player you were while you were at Colorado. But was there something that happened in high school that was like a defining moment you look back on that kind of like turned your career around?
Well, I think, when I was a senior, everybody was like, "Hey, Pat, your brother's up at CU, and CU is the big time school down the road. Where are you going, Pat?" And that was just so humiliating. And then on top of that, I was told no by very, lower level Division I schools that I didn't even want to go to them, but I was also told no by them.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that was a very defining moment as well. And I think that just, you've got to, take your kids in Southwest Missouri and figure out what is the motivating factor for them. Mine was being embarrassed that my brother was kicking my butt. And so it could be anything for any of your kids, Kevin, and they've just got to find that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great story of kind of perseverance, because, you kind of hear about kids and it's like they're a junior in high school and they, have a high scoring average and they're just thinking like, oh, I'm going to this Division I school. And, in reality, that's a really tough ask, because you just don't really know how motivated a kid is. Some kids just think like college golf is like high school, where you go sign up and you get the gear, basically. Right. So, I'm trying to share some stories and educate that, like, you want to kind of have your bases covered, but I also know your work ethic personally, because I latched onto you whenever I was a freshman and you were a fifth year, because I was like, all right, this guy works hard. I want to kind of try to emulate the best that I can. So, in general, if you want to play at a school that's, a dream school of whatever it is, like, working hard is the number one thing you have to do. And that's on the course and off the course. You have to, it's good to market yourself and promote yourself and stuff like that. Jim, I want to throw it to you. I mean, you were an assistant coach at CU for 3 years, I think. Is that right?
That's correct. Three
So
full
what
years.
were some of the what were some of the things that you saw, whenever you were recruiting kids that that stood out? Maybe it wasn't necessarily like play on a golf course, but maybe a couple stories that you can share from kids who were impressive in unique sort of ways, and maybe things that you would advise a kid now of how they can kind of promote themselves.
Right. So I guess I would break it down into three categories quickly. One would be just obviously what do you shoot, and don't feel like you have to be a Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson junior golfer where you have several years worth of scores that are dipping into the 60s and you're just dominating everyone. Most coaches realize that's not going to be the case, but they do want to see what kind of your level of performance is. So hopefully you have dipped into the 60s at least a few times in competition by the time you're, say, a junior or senior. But by no means do you have to have 50 scores in the 60s in major tournaments. The second thing is academics. Obviously, like, depending on the school you're recruiting for as an assistant coach, like, what your parameters are in terms of who you can recruit. And so be aware of where you stand academically compared to the schools you're applying to. Doesn't mean you have to be a genius again. Just make sure you match where you're shooting for what's realistic or semi-realistic for you. And then the third thing would be, I already forgot the third thing that I was going to say. Oh, the third thing is when kids are reaching out, I noticed that, like I said earlier, it's very much like a job thing. This is actually something that I'm still, because I'm looking for a new job right now myself, something that I'm kind of employing in my own life. There is a tendency to be overly timid, or humility is good, but also sometimes kids just shoot themselves in the foot. Like, I remember kids writing me emails, like really, really, really long emails because they felt bad because they shot like at 76 or 77. And it's like, one, you didn't even need to tell me that. I mean, more so focus on, send me an email after you had a good tournament and tell me what you learned or whatnot. I appreciate the honesty, but you don't need to send me, a really long email of why, tripling the 17th hole and bogeying the 18th hole cost you to miss out on the US Junior Am qualifier or something like that. It's okay if you include that score in your resume, absolutely, but just don't shoot yourself in the foot more than it already is difficult to get on a college team.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that like bad golf can happen, but I mean, I've seen kids put asterisks on their resume with like 84 asterisk windy. You know what I mean? And like we all know bad golf happens. I mean, goodness, we've all done it. But I think whenever you see things like that, I mean, I haven't been in your shoes before as a coach, but I see something like that, and I'm like, this kid's making excuses, rather than just like owning it and then going out the next day and shooting 72. I mean, that's more. I think, from my eyes, again, I haven't done it, but like somebody who can go 84, 72 back-to-back days, that's more impressive than just someone who shoots 71 2 straight days or something like that. Because those sort of like recoveries are really valuable in college golf for sure. As you're out there grinding out long tournaments.
Right. And your local golf coaches, wherever you are, say regionally, they're going to be pretty familiar with the difficulty of the courses that you may have played. Certainly, the coaches in Colorado are very familiar with kind of the general difficulty of courses around Colorado. So if they just see like you shot at 76 on this course or 69 on that course, they're going to know like, actually, maybe the 75 or 76 was a little better than that 69 you shot at some really easy golf course.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat, any stories that maybe you can share from your time recruiting as an assistant that you saw, whether it was an email from a kid that really caught your eye, or maybe you're out on the course and you saw something interesting, anything like that you could share to maybe shed some light on how it actually plays out?
I think it's pretty nerve-wracking calling a college golf coach, and it can be fairly awkward when you're 16 or 15. One story that really caught my eye, and so what I'm saying is I always felt like calling was much more impressive than emailing, simply for the fact it's coming from you. It's not coming from your parent. You've got to come up with answers on the fly when the coach asks you. But one of the more impressive calling stories I can say is when I first got the job. I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I didn't know we had an office phone that nobody told me. And I was apparently responsible for that. And we were almost never, ever in the office. We're out on the road recruiting. We're doing camps. We're like maybe in the office once every 2 weeks because there's so much other stuff, on the course. And so this kid left a voicemail on our office phone, I think 14 times, like literally every 2 days for a month, he left a voicemail. And I was just so impressed by that. And I went and watched him, the rest of the summer because of that. And he turned out to be one of the great, greater players in Colorado. But I was just impressed that he took it on his own initiative. It was very awkward. It's awkward leaving 14 voicemails. And the problem with the, and that sounds a little ridiculous, the 14 voicemails, but the reason he did it is because the rules at the time, if a kid left a voicemail with us, we weren't allowed to call them back. But if we answered the phone, we were allowed to talk. It sounds ridiculous. So he would be like, I'm going to call you tomorrow at noon on this number, and I hope to talk to you. I'm going to call you in 3 days at 2 o'clock, and I hope to talk to you. But unfortunately, we were just never in the office during that period. So I thought that was impressive. It came from the kid. It was on the phone. It was his own initiative. And that's one thing I would suggest to your kids rather than mass emails.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I haven't really thought of that, especially now. I mean, kids anymore, like it's just purely like texting and,
right.
I mean, I hear like DMs are popular now between coaches and recruits as far as communication and stuff like that. But I mean, I remember those phone calls that, I would make whenever I was being recruited, and it was awkward, but you tried to embrace it the best you can. I mean, Jim, I remember being in a hotel room with you in like Las Cruces, New Mexico, whenever you were calling kids, and it's awkward, but I do think there's value in that, Pat. So I appreciate you kind of bringing that up. Last thing I want to ask you guys, and Jim, I'll throw this to you first, is I know you kind of laid out those 3 little things, but is there anything else, like if a kid just came up to you, maybe he's 15 years old, he's a relatively good player, and he's like, hey, I want to play at University of Colorado or college, or just a big time school. What would you tell me to do? Is there anything, I know we can talk about work ethic and putting, but is there anything else you would maybe throw at a kid like that to be like, hey, here's a little secret, the secret sauce on how to get there? Anything you would tell him?
Huh. Well, gosh, I, how about you ask Pat that one first? Let me think about it for a second. I mean, there's a lot of things I would tell him. I don't know how much time I have to tell him. And secondly, I would also have to keep in mind, am I an assistant coach at that point, or am I just Jim?
No, you're just you, so you can speak freely with no rules on how
No
you
NCAA.
advise.
Okay.
So,
Kevin,
Pat, feel free to jump in. Yeah.
I feel like there are a lot of kids out there who have extraordinary resources, the best coaches, the best lessons, access to tournaments, access to this and everything else. And there's a lot of kids that simply don't. But the fact is, you can learn an unbelievable amount about this game from YouTube, from things like this, from books, from magazines. There are so many world-class instructors giving great advice on Instagram right now that the kid, when he's 14, should have a very good fundamental understanding of the golf swing. I don't know if that was around in 2001 when Jim and I were, coming out of 8th grade, simply because the internet was just starting to come along. So I would, tell all your kids in Southwest Missouri, if they are feeling underprivileged or don't have access to the best. Well, actually they do. Literally, if they have an Instagram account, they can watch some of the best lessons and learn the best techniques and the best fundamentals. And then take it to any driving range, any putting green, any, in the entire state. And that's all you need. That's really all you need. And so I just hate when kids give the excuse that they don't have access to the top instruction.
Yeah. I guess I could play on that too, Kevin. I would say for sure, learning how to kind of teach yourself and learn is something that I had absolutely no idea how to do. And quite honestly, I didn't know how to do it very well until I was probably my third year of actually coaching. And in fact, I became a much better golfer as a coach than I ever was exclusively as a player in college, because I think I had to become more aware of what's going on around me and what's going on around in my own swing. So I would tell a kid to be very self-aware. Second thing I would tell him is to make sure he has a really positive attitude. I don't mean phony, cheesy, positive attitude, but coaches take notice of the guy who's a chronic club slammer versus the kid who continually has a good attitude and seems to frame golf as important, but not the most important thing in the history of the world. Because there are so many junior golfers who truly, go into such meltdown mode that it's scary to sometimes be around them, or even college golfers sometimes. So positive attitude for sure. And then 3, just make sure you're actually being honest with yourself. If you really, really want to play for a top school, you better be practicing many hours almost every single day for years on end. If you don't do that, you're just lying to yourself and lying to other people when you say you want to play for Stanford or Arizona State or wherever it is, Colorado, somewhere in Missouri, Oklahoma State, whatever. You're lying to yourself if you don't put in the hours.
Right. And I think one thing you touched on there, Jim, that's really important is attitude when you're out recruiting a kid. And I think that goes to parents as well. I mean, you've probably been on courses where you see parents reacting to kids making bogeys, and like, I'm sure that's a mental note that's made of like, what's going on here with the family situation, little things of like, does the kid have a bent in kickstand on his bag? It's those little details that matter when you're trying to differentiate.
Right. I remember those. I forgot about that for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure we all have stories where I remember playing with a kid where his dad broke his little like 3-legged seat against a tree when his kid 3-putted. Yeah, it's one of the things you don't forget. And I remember later on the kid was an unbelievable player and didn't really play at an unbelievable school because like his dad was known as like, we don't want this guy around. It's one of those things that parents have to understand, like they're a part of the team that's getting recruited, and their behavior matters. They can't just misbehave the whole time.
And I would qualify it a little bit more. I would say it's okay to have fire and have some sort of competitive intensity that you can that people notice. But it's just when you get a kid who's, every single round at some point there's a chronic club slam issue, then that becomes a problem, because you wonder if they even really like golf as a whole, and why they're even playing in the first place if it's so miserable. And let me clarify. There's probably been at least a handful of times over the course of 15 years that Pat and I have been that kid. I'm just saying, you better make sure that you don't do that at the wrong time.
Right, absolutely. Like there's a time and place for it, and I've seen it with some kids where I'm convinced whenever there's a coach out watching or their parents, they're slamming clubs to just try to make it seem like they're upset with a shot because it's not that good because that's what they think it's not good. You know what I mean? It's like mentally they're like, oh, that's not a good shot for me. Normally I'm way better, but they slam after every single shot because they're just having a bad day. And it's like, no, you're not as good as you maybe think you are. Like just accept hitting a wedge to 15 feet and move on with your day, sort of thing. So.
Right.
We've all seen it that way. Well, guys, I appreciate you you both taking a little time to chat. I mean, you guys have such kind of unique journeys in both, being recruited, playing many tournaments at a high Division One school, and then becoming an assistant coach for them. So I appreciate your insight and wisdom that you both shared. So you guys both be well, and we will talk to you soon. Sound good?
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.